Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, retired from the Army, now a distinguished fellow at the Center for Land and Warfare Studies, a defense think tank, and Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, an occasional contributor to ThePrint, currently additional Director General at the Center for Air Power Studies, also a defense think tank. Gentlemen, welcome to the ThePrint debates.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti.
Air Vice Marshal Bahadur, your first comments on the Aero India show, a hybrid show right now, and also the theme of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is the theme of this of the show.
First of all, the important part of Aero India this year is that this is perhaps the only air show that is happening in the shadow of COVID. The Paris Air Show has been cancelled, or rather postponed, and so has been the other one, the Farnborough. So that's a very major step, a bold step taken by the government of India to go ahead. There were many cynics who said we should also postpone it. It's gone off to a roaring start. We have had a flying display at the wonderful weather at Yelahanka. So the important part is that this would be looked at by the aviation industry and also the other manufacturing industries, since there are many Indian products being showcased here. Mm-hmm. Twitter and social media, and as also the aviation magazines, are full of a certain sudden spurt in startups that have risen and are contributing now to the ecosystem of aviation.
Right.
Surely we are not there yet, far away from that. But the important part that's happened is the signing of the contract between the Government of India and HAL for the 83 Tejas Mark 1A aircraft. So that's a 48,000 crore contract going to the industry. A lot of jobs.
Tell us why this is significant, apart from the fact that it's a 48,000 crore deal, a project that's gone to the HAL, the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. But why is this significant?
Significant because it's actually a renewal of faith in the Indian industry to be the mainstay of the Indian Air Force, the potency of Indian Air Force. Mm-hmm. We've had indigenous products earlier, but the last major one was the Marut, and that was way back late 60s. That was there. After that, generally they have been imported. So here we have the Indian Air Force placing its faith, and actually all eggs in one basket, if I may say so, in HAL's basket, because after this 83 Tejas, the Chief of Air Staff is on record as saying, we will go for the Tejas Mark II, we will go for the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, which is going to come up. So the HAL, the ADA, the DRDO better perform with quality and on time. Timeline is very important when it comes to military procurements, which unfortunately has not been a plus factor in our industry. So they really have to turn a new leaf, maybe get onto a new work ethos and produce aircraft in the timelines required by the Air Force. So that's the importance of this Tejas contract and what's coming up later.
But this, General Sharma, can I ask you, Air Vice Marshal Bahadur is talking about turning a new leaf or perhaps inculcating a new work ethos. Now, we've seen these last several decades how India has been so dependent on foreign arms. And I was just looking at some data. Of course, 60 or 70% of your arms are still of Soviet origin or Russian origin. But America has become a new source, a new supplier. I was just looking at something which says that in the final year of the Donald Trump administration, India bought $3.4 billion worth of arms equipment from the US. So what is Make in India all about? What does it really mean?
Okay, thank you, Jyoti, for inviting us. But the fact is that we are gradually coming of age. As you see, Aero India is one of these, the third, fourth year which is coming up of Air India. It is a message being conveyed across that we are reaching something. We are ramping up our potential to a different level.
But why is it taking so long? Surely you don't need to be 72 years old to be able to finally realize that you need a new work ethos?
Yeah, you're right. See, all of us who have worked with and seen what DRDO produces and what the DPSUs produce, and what is the interaction we have with the industry. It's obvious that the DRDO and the DPSUs have not been able to match up with the requirements per se. It's not that India doesn't have a potential. Indian industry may have a potential, but the the governmental sector in defense production has not been able to marry up to that levels. And that is because there is a governmental culture in working. And I think, when Tejas is one issue, but the ships being produced for the Indian Navy second issue, there is a message being conveyed across to the DPSUs and to the DRDO that you please pull up your socks and you get on with this task of doing so. And the Make in India has been on for around 6-7 years. Its success story is, as you rightly pointed out, limited. It is not taken off in that manner it needed to be taken off. But the fact is that there is a push here. The Atmanirbhar itself is a push here. And I think they'll have to produce results. The outcomes, the inputs are there. The money being spent is there. But the outcome is not there. Why should we buy carbine, say, from UAE? I mean, UAE is not even a producer. But we are now wanting to buy carbine from UAE, which certainly can be produced in India. Or start looking for rifles, 6-hour or something else buying from outside, when we ought to have the potential to produce the basic rifle. There is a little gap here. And that gap can be given only by the impetus now, which has been provided in the course of 1 year.
So I'm going to ask you both about the defense budget. It's been there's been a total rise of 1.4% in the budget that has just been part of the budget that's been tabled on the floor of the House, from 4,71,000 crores last year to 4,78,000 crores this year. A nominal rise. Vice Marshal Bahadur, are you concerned? Do you think that you need more money and that perhaps Make in India will only benefit from increased allocations?
So, if you notice, that's the overall figure. What we are concerned about is the allocation towards the capital budget. Now, what's happened over the previous year is, and this is where statistics will be thrown around in various forms. There is a budget estimate, which is what has been given now for the coming year. And similarly, there was a budget estimate last year. So 20,000 extra crores were given because of the crisis in Eastern Ladakh.
Right.
So the revised estimate for the last year, from there to the budget estimate this year to buy new equipment, to buy capital equipment, is actually only 500 crores. Mm-hmm. It is 500 crores new extra amount of money only that has been given for the three services combined. Now that's where the catch is. Obviously, the government has to find money from somewhere to make sure that Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, Atmanirbharta proceeds at a certain pace. Because it's just not Tejas that we were talking of. It's just not the rifles that we're talking of. There's so many other things that, unfortunately, we have landed up not having, which we should have had maybe 15, 20 years back. Right. So budget is always a problem, has always been a problem. Here is when I personally feel, we always say it's a guns versus butter debate that always happens. I think we must add something more. I think we must add it's a guns versus budget versus infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Well, the government has to decide, prioritize between infrastructure, guns and butter. A lot of money going into infrastructure. The government has a bigger picture of what's happening behind the scenes in diplomacy, in international relations. And if we are found wanting in terms of security, some money has to be found to come in here.
Right. So, General Sharma, can I ask you the same question? Are you concerned that the allocations are so meager?
Look, if you say we're not concerned, then that's not right. Because it is actually exactly nearly the same budget which we got last year. And there are committed liabilities which have yet to be paid, which items have been purchased or would be coming this year, which are also part of the capital projections for the coming year. Now, the government saved about 19,000 crores from the pension budget. The pension budget was 134 and it dropped down to 115 this year. Now, why did it get saved? There can be many issues. There is an article published in ThePrint also. I've also written somewhere. on the similar line. In fact, I was quoted in print yesterday on this one. The fact of the matter is that there is a problem in the pension reduction thing. Is it because we underestimated last year? I mean, overestimated last year? That's the reason why it has been done this year, or because of DS savings? The issue is that if the IMF is projecting us 11% growth of GDP in this year, at least a projection could have been made that there is a budget given to us this year is same as early stage of last year. We intend to provide you another 30,000 crores in later this year in the early stage, which you can work at it. So at least there would have been hope for us to work at it.
Yeah, but we've had, it's been a terrible year, that
that is understandable.
All of last year has been given over to COVID. The economy is not in great shape. In fact, Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, has tried to divest a lot of the public sector undertakings which were losing money badly and then allocate that money to other sectors, including health. So perhaps the armed forces shouldn't grumble so much.
No, we're not grumbling. It's not a question of grumbling. It's a question of, look, if for the Chinese front, we spent 20,000 crore last year, of course, some of the things would have come which can recycle, like the clothing and all, which we would have purchased for additional troops would get recycled. But the food ration being supplied at that altitude, including the fuel for warming purpose, would continue in the coming year because there is no respite to it. So that would be one major chunk which would go up towards the Chinese side. And it's not Ladakh alone. Similar thing is happening in Northeast front, which is not coming to limelight so much. So the fact is that there are compulsive requirements for the coming year, which we can forecast, and that need to be catered for. And then there is a question of modernization. I agree with you that there are competing requirements. There is great socio-economic issues which matter to us, but then there is also an adversary which is tapping on your doors, and that needs to be addressed similarly. It's the message that we had to convey across to China that yes, we have problems, but we are also catering for you. That message may have got wanting, I think.
Marshal Bahadur, what do you think?
Availability of extra money in the budget conveys the fact, a message that, listen, we mean business, and our deterrence value of our armed forces is not going to come down. That's the aim of the government. So both are vitally important. A strong industry as well as the money is available to the armed forces to strengthen their capability. Both important.
Okay, so let me take you, draw you both a little bit towards military diplomacy, which is becoming an increasingly important arm of the government's diplomatic initiatives abroad. And let me start with the coup in Myanmar, which took place on Monday. And just a few months ago in October, you had the Army Chief, General Naravane, who visited Myanmar along with the Foreign Secretary, Harsh Shringla. Now that was an interesting visit, don't you think, General Sharma?
You just can't avoid the military in Myanmar. It's different than most countries. In Pakistan, it's a different situation. They have not constitutionalized it, but they do it the same way. The fact is that before, I presume, before the Army Chief and the Foreign Secretary went to Myanmar, the previous 1 year or year and a half, there have been intensive interactions being carried out at various functional levels between our military and their military. And we have been hearing of this one on various planes, including sale of equipment, including, say, Kaladan multimodal project, or say, Situate port coming up, and so many other things, or the trilateral road highway which is being built. So it was already happening. This visit, which happened in October last year, was a culmination of the efforts of the operational directorates and of the procurement and those directors who have worked behind the scenes to come to an end. So it was, I will presume, was to convey that all this has happened is okay, done, and we will accept whatever we have accepted there. So all is not come into limelight, but I presume there would have been certain kind of actions taken and arrived at in this visit of the Army Chief and of course they handed over a large number of Indian insurgent groups. They
right.
also
22 insurgents were handed back.
So there is an interaction happening at the ground, at the core level, at the command, which is Eastern Army level, and at the operation level. It's been parallelly happening. So the Army Chief's visit, I would say, is equal to all these visits put together and taking an action on ground.
And Marshal Bahadur, tell me, as a former Indian Air Force officer, so my question to you is about Afghanistan. Afghanistan wants India to give it much more, say, equipment, attack equipment. You have given a few helicopters, 3 or 4. But do you think India should do much more to expand its footprint abroad? Vice Marshal Bahadur?
And I'll get back to Afghanistan. Just do remember that during when George Fernandez was alive and when he was in the government and even before that, he really pushed for the Myanmaris, and the Americans had taken a strong stand against India. They didn't want us to have any relations, but he was proved right, because the moment the Americans realized that the Chinese were moving in, they came running back to the Myanmaris. So when you're talking of Myanmar, we have to play our cards well. It's a tightrope that we would be walking. And the same thing would happen in case of Afghanistan. As and when the Americans withdraw or the foreign troops withdraw from Afghanistan, I think it will be a mistake to send our troops on ground there. The biggest problem is there exists a country called Pakistan. We don't have any land connectivity with them. That's number one. So how to keep them employed, to keep them going. Second, fighting someone else's war, even if it is in your interest, requires a lot of thinking. Because finally, in the long run, the question that's got to be asked is, what is in it for me? Why are our boys and later our women fighting in a particular place? What is in it for me? And that was the questions which the American boys and girls asked when they were in Vietnam and they were in Korea. And now it's been asked when they are in Afghanistan. Yes, we have strategic interests. We must aid the government in Afghanistan to, we can't say modulate the government, but to support it such that they are able to stand on their own feet. A strong Afghanistan, an independently minded Afghanistan, I think is in our interest. It need not be pro-India, but it should certainly not be in the clutches of the Pakistanis. If we have some sort of a neutrality like that, then I think to a great extent, we would have achieved our aim. Afghanistan, the Afghanis are good friends of India, and they would always remain so. That part you can be assured of.
Right. General Sharma, what do you think? I've traveled to Kabul sometimes, perhaps less often than I should, but you see, especially these days, there is such utter chaos in Kabul and across the country. Every day there is a bomb blast. The Taliban doesn't own responsibility. Nobody does. Somebody is carrying out this mayhem. So do you think, short of boots on the ground, do you think India should do much more, and what?
Okay, since all of us have been students of Afghanistan for centuries altogether, as a nation, the federal government has always been weak. Even today, they say 60% of the territory is occupied by Taliban. The urban areas are probably in the control of the central government. Now, to get involved into a nation which has always had problematic central government, and it's getting involved into kind of war fighting, which is of different kind altogether. The Russians have burnt their hands, the Americans have burnt their hands. To get boots on the ground, as you rightly pointed out, may not be a good proposition for us in Afghanistan. I'm not saying across the board, but in Afghanistan.
Okay.
The second part of the story is that, do we support them? Yes, we must do it. Yeah, unfortunately, there is just no way that we have to circumvent the method of reaching Afghanistan. You can't go up north, you can't go directly, you go through Iran and, assist.
Yeah, but so can you create a coalition of the willing? You did it in the 90s with Russia and with Iran. Do you think that perhaps the talk should begin with these other neighbors and these other friends and allies of Afghanistan, and that perhaps India should play a key role in moving that along?
Now, it's what is required. They require weaponry, which of course can be supplied. There shouldn't be a problem. But it also has to be some kind of training to be carried out, joint trainings for them to get troops across to our area and train them is very difficult. Now we'll have to find methodology with what is left behind by NATO and what is the green zone left behind by the Americans.
Can you train them in Afghanistan?
We can train them, but it's not an easy proposition. We will have to establish a green zone like the Americans had there, a protected area. And despite a protected area, those areas used to get bombed off and on, even when the Americans were there. So we'll have to, if we have to train them, we'll have to establish a kind of a area, secure area where we can do so. Or they can send troops across here to see, we get in the NDC, we get officers trained, we get men being trained, but that's a very minuscule effort. We need to put in a little more to train their troops into ground, the armed forces.
So, Marshal Bahadur, can I come back to you and ask you about India's military diplomacy? It's been quite interesting that the army chief, besides going to Myanmar, has been to the UAE, he went to Saudi Arabia. Nepal, of course, is, I think the two armies are consider each other to be brotherly, brother armies. But this military diplomacy aspect of the Modi government is quite interesting because I think in previous times it hasn't been as open as it has been now. Do you think there is a message there somewhere?
Certainly, and we always used to wonder, I've retired for quite some time now, but we always used to wonder, why didn't we take these steps earlier? The military or the defense arm of any government is one of those 3-4 legs on which a nation stands, besides the diplomatic those other people. So making best use and utilizing the expertise of our defense attaches, our defense missions abroad, opening up more defense missions. Even now, I personally feel our representation in our missions is not what it should be. It should be much more. Much more defense attaches must go out to other countries. Like, for example, we have been the highest contributor to the United Nations.
Right.
Do you know, in the UN, our mission, permanent mission in New York, we have one colonel. That's it, one colonel. And that also has happened in the last, I think, 5 years. Before that, there was no permanent army officer or armed forces officer.
What about in the neighborhood? Do you have big...
Yeah. So when we talk of our neighborhood, we have started expanding. Our defense attaches have increased, that's for sure. Besides this, and they are now being called back, like I think all of them should be back and watching Aero India so that they have a first-hand knowledge of what Indian industry is capable of doing. Carry this message across and see where our industry can sell arms to. That's a very important part of a defense attaché.
So you mean to say that the defense attaché in India's missions abroad should also be talking about India's private industry that is now getting into the manufacturing of arms?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because after all, the private industry is Indian industry. And the money earned whether by a DPSU or by a private firm is coming into India. So they are as much ambassadors of the government as much as they are ambassadors of the Indian industry, private industry.
Okay.
And that is what should happen.
So let me ask you, one of the defining images of the Aero India show so far, of course, it's just started, is this big fat Globemaster, the C-17, which is now, of course, in the Indian Air Force, accompanied by 2 Sukhoi 30 jets. So the American origin Globemaster, the Russian origin Sukhoi, flying past in a rehearsal at the Aero India show. And then you have in the Indian Air Force, you're now inducting the French Rafale. You have the Jaguar. You have, it's a bit like a bit like the United Nations in the Indian Air Force.
No, first of all, it doesn't suit any Air Force or any armed force to have a multitude of types in its inventory. That's number one, because it's the maintenance and the logistics that becomes a problem. You have so many different lines to maintain. It's a logistician's nightmare, if I can use that term. It's not so much about pilots, because as far as pilots are concerned, they go into a particular stream, and when they change over, they don't jump from one cockpit to the other.
Right.
But it conveys a different, strategically speaking, an American C-17 being escorted by 2 Russian Sukhois, conveys the fact that, listen, our mainstay aircraft are being bought from outside. So the tightrope walking that we need to do to keep both sides happy. The Russians are unhappy, we are going to the Americans, and the Americans are telling us, don't buy the S-400, otherwise we'll apply the cuts on you. So it's not a happy situation from that point of view. We should not be dependent. We should be flexible in our foreign policy as we were earlier. And I think we are demonstrating that. Possibly we have developed the knack out of a necessity of not having had your own homegrown defense industry. which hopefully should change the way things are happening.
General Sharma, last question to you. When you look at the eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation in Ladakh, or at least in some parts, do you feel that, okay, you've been there. What do you think? How do you think this is going to play out?
Look, I would see the attitudinal issue of China changing not in 2020, but quite some time. And if you follow what he did with Philippines in Scarborough Shoal, when the Americans said, okay, you withdraw, both navies to withdraw, and the Philippines withdrew, but he did not withdraw and established a base out there. So, I would guess it. He's not withdrawing from where he's already there. And if he wants to take on only a very narrow perspective of disengagement, which is only both sides of the Pegong Tso Lake, he doesn't want to talk about the larger issue of the entire area, including the Depsang Bulge. He doesn't want to talk about how we will manage in future. Just withdraw from Pegong Tso. That's not the method of doing things. This actually shows his attitude. He doesn't want to get out of this. It is a kind of geopolitical pressure he's brought here. It's a geopolitical pressure he's also brought in Gilgit-Baltistan. He's exploiting mineral resources opposite Siachen Glacier in Ganche district in Gilgit-Baltistan. So he means business of various kinds. Now they're saying he's making another road which connects Kardu and Gilgit-Baltistan across Shaksgam Valley, bypassing Kunjre. He has big business in this area. It's not what he's done last year. He means larger business. We got to be prepared. I'm not saying it's new normal. New normal has also become a cliche. It's not new normal. This is the way things are going to happen. And we have to stay there. Otherwise, if we back down and not take a holistic view, we will be losers in many territories. It's not salami slicing alone. He's eating the salami. And that's what he's doing in many other places. Not to watch it out.
Well, fascinating debate. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.